The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is often spoken about as if it belongs to the Cold War, a military alliance frozen in time, created to counter a threat that no longer exists. Yet NATO remains one of the most powerful and influential institutions shaping global politics today. It expands, intervenes, deters, provokes, reassures, and divides all at the same time. Some see it as a defensive shield that preserved peace in Europe for decades, while others view it as a source of instability that fuels confrontation with rival powers. If the Cold War ended more than 30 years ago, why does NATO still matter so much? Why has it not disappeared like the threat it was created to stop? And how did an alliance formed in the ruins of World War II come to shape global power in the 21st century? In this video, we are going to answer all these questions, so let's start. To understand NATO, we must begin with the world it was born into. In 1949, Europe was devastated. 2 world wars in 30 years had destroyed economies, killed tens of millions, and shattered trust between states. At the same time, a new power balance was emerging. The United States and the Soviet Union stood as rival superpowers with fundamentally different political and economic systems. Western European countries feared not only Soviet military expansion, but also their own weakness. Individually, they could not defend themselves. NATO was created as a collective security alliance based on the simple but revolutionary idea: an attack on one member would be considered an attack on all. This was not about launching wars, but about preventing one through deterrence. A crucial point that is often misunderstood is NATO's original purpose. It was not designed as an offensive force to invade the Soviet Union. It was designed to lock the United States into European security, discourage Soviet aggression, and prevent the reemergence of militarized nationalism within Europe itself. By binding former rivals like France and West Germany into a shared security framework, NATO helped stabilize a continent that had repeatedly collapsed into war. This role is often overlooked when NATO is portrayed only as an anti-Soviet or anti-Russian alliance. During the Cold War, NATO's power came less from battlefield action and more from credibility. The alliance rarely fought directly, but its existence shaped calculations in Moscow and Washington. The presence of U.S. troops and nuclear guarantees in Europe made it clear that any large-scale conflict would escalate beyond a regional war. This deterrence helped avoid direct confrontation even during moments of extreme tension like the Berlin crises and the Cuban Missile Crisis. NATO did not win the Cold War through combat. It endured long enough for the Soviet system to collapse under its own economic and political contradictions. When the Cold War ended, many expected NATO to fade away. The Warsaw Pact dissolved, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Europe no longer seemed divided by ideology. Yet NATO did not disappear. Instead, it reinvented itself, and this reinvention is key to understanding why it still shapes global power today. In the 1990s, NATO shifted from a purely defensive alliance to a broader security organization. It intervened in the Balkans, first in Bosnia and later in Kosovo, not to defend member states, but to stop regional instability and humanitarian crises. These interventions were controversial, but they marked a turning point. NATO was no longer confined to defending borders, it was now shaping outcomes. One of the most debated aspects of NATO's post-Cold War role is its expansion eastward. Former Warsaw Pact countries and Soviet republics sought NATO membership not because they were forced, but because they feared future insecurity. For them, NATO membership represented protection, political stability, and integration into the Western world. However, from Russia's perspective, this expansion looked very different. Russian leaders viewed NATO moving closer to their borders as a strategic threat, regardless of NATO's stated defensive nature. This tension between NATO's self-image and Russia's perception lies at the heart of many modern conflicts. It is important to address a common piece of misinformation here. NATO did not sign a formal treaty promising never to expand eastward. While verbal assurances were discussed during German reunification talks, they were not legally binding agreements covering future membership of Eastern European states. This distinction matters because it shows how political expectations, rather than written guarantees, later turned into accusations of betrayal. Understanding this helps explain why NATO-Russia relations deteriorated so sharply without relying on simplified narratives of deception. The attacks of September 11, 2001 marked another transformation. For the first and only time in NATO's history, NATO invoked Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, in response to an attack on the United States. This led to NATO's involvement in Afghanistan, far from the North Atlantic region. The mission exposed both NATO's strengths and its weaknesses. It showed the alliance could operate globally, but it also revealed deep divisions among members over strategy, burden sharing, and political objectives. NATO did not fail because it lacked military power. It struggled because military alliances are not designed to rebuild societies. By the 2010s, NATO faced a renewed identity crisis. Defense spending declined in many European countries, and critics questioned whether the alliance was still relevant. That debate ended abruptly in 2014 with Russia's annexation of Crimea. For the first time since the Cold War, borders in Europe were changed by force. NATO responded not by going to war, but by reinforcing its eastern flank, deploying troops to member states closest to Russia. This response reflected NATO's core logic: deterrence, not escalation. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 further shaped NATO's role. Although Ukraine is not a NATO member, the war reinforced why NATO exists in the eyes of its members. Countries like Finland and Sweden, long neutral, chose to seek NATO membership, not because NATO forced them, but because the security environment had changed. This highlights another misunderstood reality. NATO's power is not based on coercion, but on voluntary alignment driven by fear and interest. Today, NATO shapes global power in several ways. Militarily, it remains the most powerful alliance in the world, with unmatched coordination, technology, and collective capabilities. Politically, it binds North America and Europe together, ensuring that transatlantic relations remain central to global security. Strategically, it signals limits. NATO does not guarantee peace everywhere, but it raises the cost of aggression against its members to unacceptable levels. At the same time, NATO is not a unified actor with a single mind. It is a coalition of democracies with different threat perceptions, interests, and domestic politics. Disagreements over defense spending, interventions, and relations with China show that NATO's strength lies in consensus, but that consensus is often fragile. This complexity is often lost in simplified portrayals of NATO as either an unstoppable force or an aggressive empire. Ultimately, NATO's rise and endurance tell us something deeper about global power. Alliances do not survive because of ideology alone. They survive because they adapt to fear, uncertainty, and shifting balances of power. NATO continues to shape the world not because it seeks conflict, but because many states still believe that collective security is safer than standing alone. In an era of renewed great power competition, NATO's relevance is not a relic of the past. It is a reflection of a world that has not become as stable as many once hoped.